Hey guys, so the question that I get asked the most frequently as a TC is why do I need a TC? Right? They're basically asking what does a TC do? Why can't I do that by myself? And is a TC worth it? So let's talk about that. What does a TC do? On a very high level, a TC will be the one that facilitates your transaction to the finish line. Right, we keep clear communication between all the parties, and we do a lot of that icky stuff that makes a typical investor cringe. Right? There's a lot of things involved to keep a transaction running smoothly, and you want someone with attention to detail to make sure that the transaction is on course and actually set to close on time. So we'll get down to a more granular level and talk about the specific things a TC does do. But before we do that, I think it's really important to talk about what we don't do first. A lot of people, especially new investors who aren't in Sub 2 and don't have access to the creative contracts, will assume that a TC can do all this stuff for them. The answer is no, we do not. We do not draft your contracts. We don't provide you these contracts. We don't do any of the negotiation on your behalf. We do not replace your attorneys. We don't give you legal advice, and we don't underwrite your deals for you, right? We're not the ones looking at it and saying, yes, this is a deal or this isn't a deal, right? There's specific people out there doing these tasks for you. Your TC is not that person, right? And the reason is because a TC just doesn't want to get involved with the liability of providing the contracts or filling out the contracts or any of that stuff, right? We're not attorneys. We don't have malpractice insurance. You, as the investor, should be the one who's filling out your own contracts or seeking legal advice if you need help with that. Right? We help to review these docs for you, so we're not just leaving you out there hanging, right? But you need to know that there's a lot of additional liability involved for the person who does fill out the contract, right? And this is your deal as an investor. So your TC is just your assistant. There needs to be a very clear boundary on what we should and shouldn't be doing. So now that that's clear, let's talk about what we do, right? We gather the documents. So at the very beginning of the transaction, after I get the full story of what you're doing, I will go out there and gather all the documents. So if you're doing a sub 2, I'm going to go to the seller, make sure I get the mortgage statements, insurance info, utility info, all that stuff, and make sure I get the purchase contract, the addendums and disclosures, whatever's involved, whatever you have, I'm going to go get that for you. I'm also going to send out docs for signatures. So we don't draft the contracts for you, but when they are drafted and they're ready to get sent out, we do all that stuff. We also review the contract and the documents that do come in. So we do consults. We can tell you what goes where if you're not really sure how that contract should be filled out. And we essentially make sure that the contract is accurately reflecting what you actually negotiated with the seller. Right? Yet we want to make sure that it's all very, very clearly written out. We also keep track of timelines. So when does the inspection period end? When is the closing date? Has the title company pulled the payoff statement? Do they have an identities report, a title report, all that stuff? We want to make sure everything is done in a timely manner, which kind of moves into keeping things moving. Time is of the essence in any transaction, and a lot of people assume that a creative transaction moves very, very quickly because the buyer doesn't need to get a mortgage and everything moves really fast. But that is just simply not true. It can be fast, but every transaction moves only as fast as the slowest party, right? So if you really want a transaction that's closed in 14 days, it's not impossible, but every party involved really needs to be on top of things, get everything done ASAP, and really be cooperative in getting this transaction moving at that timeline. So your TC is the person that kind of rushes people, that is that pesky person who keeps calling and following up and emailing to follow up on people, and just really make sure everyone is doing their part and moving forward. We also keep that clear communication between all parties. So, like I said, we're that central hub of communication. Ideally, in a transaction, I'd want to be the one to open escrow because I send that initial email with all parties involved. And I want to make sure everyone is aware of where we're at in that transaction so that when we need something from them, they'll be ready to move forward. We also help to facilitate the closing process. We help with post-closing services like the HOA transfer, power of attorney, insurance, and mortgage and utility setup. If you choose to set up servicing, that's an optional service that your TC can help you with as well. If you're doing like a wrap or some sort of seller financing, servicing can sometimes be required or at least preferred. And, a lot of the time I find in my job of a TC, education is a big part of it, right? I spend a lot of time just educating people. If you're a new person, this is your first transaction, obviously there's going to be a lot of education involved, right? But even for people who have done this before, who are a little bit more experienced, I educate them as well. And that's usually because, a professional TC will really try to stay updated with, the market changes and the best practices. These things are constantly evolving, in the creative space. So, for example, just about like 6 months ago, people were still offering a deed in lieu to help protect the sellers in a sub-2 transaction. And, it was kind of realized that that's not exactly the best way to protect the seller. There's a gray area and there's a better way of doing it, because a deed in lieu is not necessarily accepted in all states. So now the best practice is to offer a deed of trust and a promissory note securing that seller, against the property, the subject property. So that's just one example of how things have changed over time and how hiring a professional TC will be able to just make sure you're doing things as appropriately and correctly as possible. Um, and so with that, we are your extra set of eyes. When you open a file with me, the first thing I do, before even gathering all the docs, I just want to know the story, right? I want to see the purchase agreement. I want to know all of the parties involved. So if there's a realtor, if there's a private money lender or a gator somewhere, or if there's like a connector that needs to be paid, I want to know every single party involved in this transaction. And the reason for that is, your TC is going to find the holes in your story. So those holes are red flags, potential red flags that may cause this transaction to fall through midway through the transaction. So me as a TC, I don't want to get started and charge you that deposit and start doing the work, opening escrow and getting the title company involved before I even think this can go through to the finish line. So your TC is really going to help you kind of make sure you have a full picture of your transaction and not waste people's time. Additionally, you'd be surprised how many human errors are made, even in a professional title company, right? With these professional docs, you think, oh, this must be right. No, it's not necessarily. A lot of the times people pull a title report and it's for the wrong property or the wrong person, right? You find liens for like hundreds of thousands of dollars and you freak out. Then you realize, wait, you pulled that report on, the property down the street. So your TC is there to just kind of keep an eye out for those types of things. People are people make mistakes, and having this extra set of eyes can help to mitigate different mistakes from even happening, or to catch them before something gets reported with the county. And let's see. So we are your greatest advocate. That is so important in a transaction because, your TC is going to be the person who's looking out for you in the transaction, right? Your TC signed a service agreement with you, not with anyone else. So, when it comes to checking the final HUD at the very end of the transaction, your TC is going to make sure you're getting paid what you should be getting paid and make sure that you're not getting charged someone else's fee, right? So imagine a transaction with a buyer and a seller. The buyer has their own TC. That buyer's TC is looking out for them. So if they say to you, hey, we don't need to get another TC, I have one, just use mine. That's not necessarily the best because, their TC is looking out for them, but who's looking out for you? They might do some of the general work. They might, make sure things are kind of going as they should be. But ultimately, you want to hire your own TC to make sure you've got someone on your corner who's making sure all the numbers look good for you, to make sure that if you're a private money lender, that you have all the necessary docs to protect you. So, it's not uncommon for there to be multiple TCs in a transaction because, people know that they want to have someone on their side. All right. So the next question is, do I have to use a TC? And the answer is absolutely not. You don't need to hire a TC, but you can do it all by yourself. But you need to ask yourself, like, what is your highest and best use of time? As an investor, do you really want to be the one chasing down the sellers for signatures and calling title companies every day for a status report? Or would your time be better spent going out there and finding deals? That's just something you have to figure out for yourself. Here's a stat that, is, kind of hits it home. So if a wholesaler gets 10 properties under contract and doesn't hire a TC, they will close only 3 of those transactions. Right? If that same wholesaler gets 10 properties under contract and hires a TC, they will close 7 of those transactions. So just think of that difference. That's like more than double your success rate of your transactions. That's pretty good. And the reason for that, a lot of it is because your TC is the one that kind of finds those mistakes and pushes your file forward. And they just do a lot of little grunt work that you wouldn't think about often as an investor. That's necessary for a successful transaction. So to end this, I just want to kind of point out this quote from Tony Robbins. I think it makes a lot of sense when it comes to a TC. So complexity is the enemy to execution. What does that mean? It means you want to have things simple. And what does that mean? It means that you should probably just get yourself a transaction coordinator. So anyways, thank you for taking the time to watch this. Comment below if you have any additional questions. My name is Tiffany with Coastline TC Services, and I'll see you next time.